So as we start chapter 16, one of the first things we want to talk about is this fun vocab word, periodization. What does that mean? And you can take a second and just look at the word and see if you can break it down into its component parts. Sahil? All right. Essentially timelining a certain era or portion of time, breaking it up into parts or periods. Now, this is our third period. The first one was the Foundations era, which was mostly about what? All right, the beginnings of civilization, the foundation of civilization. And from a time standpoint, what were our benchmark dates? Nick, what was the first one?
First one would be like 3000 BC.
Further back. Further back than 8. 10,000 BCE is typically when we start the Foundations era, because that is...
When the last mammoth died.
10,000 BCE is the start of a major revolution. The Neolithic Revolution. Does the Neolithic Revolution start a significant change in human life? Yeah. And so those are the kinds of events that we look for at the beginning and ending of these periods. Now, if you've never done this in your notes yet, you might want to, on the inside cover or something of your notebook, put down the periods of this course. So the first period is what? Foundations. And it starts when? 10,000 BCE with Neolithic Revolution. And it's going to cover all of the early portions of civilization. And so what's going to be a good stopping point for that Foundations era? Not BC. 600 CE. With what?
The fall of the classical civilization.
Right, the fall of all of the first big civilizations. 600 CE. So that entire stretch is the Foundations era. 10,000 BCE all the way to 600 CE. The first 10,600 years of organized human experience. Starts with the beginning of civilization, ends with the collapse of the first major civilizations. Isn't that kind of a nice, neat package? Start of civilization, end of the first civilizations. Doesn't that kind of make sense as a way to break up that portion of history? Do you see the theme there? Okay. That's also part of what periodization is. It's not just randomly chunking up history into times, but it's finding themes. It's finding reasons why we can create this chunk. So what were you going to ask? Right, so the classical era is part of the Foundations period. Because, as with anything, you can always break it down into smaller pieces. You have countries, you have states, you have counties, you have cities, you have subdivisions, you have city blocks. I mean, you can always zoom in much, much closer. So you have historical periods, and then you have eras, and then you have centuries, and then you have decades, and then you have, yesterday. So the classical era would be the latter portion of the Foundations period. Now, beginning in 600, what's a good thing to look at in terms of the start of the next period? What are some good themes? All right, we're going to call it the post-classical period. What are some good themes for that period, Stephen? Okay, rise of global religions. Christianity and Islam are both going to begin to become very, very popular and unifying around that time. What else, Nick?
The Mongols.
All right, well, the Mongols aren't doing much in 600.
So the constant presence of
Okay. Hi, Mark. Thank you. Okay, so conflicts between civilized areas and nomadic or barbarian areas. Okay, good. What else are we going to see happening at about that time? Eileen? All right, development of new trade routes. Here's a whole bunch of stuff. And who are those trade routes going to be between? Just the old civilizations coming back again? New civilizations. So that's another big theme. The spread of civilization. So we've got all these new themes running through the post-classical era. New civilizations, new trade routes, new religions, new encounters between civilizations and their neighbors. And so that whole series of themes is going to run all the way up to what date? 1450. And by 1450, have we found some of those themes have conveniently stopped? Do we have issues with nomads like the Mongols anymore by 1450? No. Have Christianity and Islam and other major religions kind of solidified themselves as global ideologies? Yeah. Have we kind of run out of new civilizations that are starting from scratch? Yeah. So, does 1450 seem like a logical time to stop that post-classical period? Okay. So now we reach our new one, the early modern period. And we're going to run that from 1450 to 1750. So again, same question. What's happening? What are the themes that mark the beginning of this new period? Nick?
European expansion.
European expansion. Was that happening before? No. Is that going to begin to happen now? Yeah, so that's a good theme. What else? What did you just read an article on? Gunpowder. Is that going to completely alter human existence? Yeah. Have any of you guys been watching the History Channel special, Mankind, the Story of All of Us? They did like an hour on gunpowder and all the different ways that it changed humanity. It's kind of crazy when you stop and think about it and you start applying those, that technology to something beyond just killing people. But you look at the way that it changes architecture, you look at the way that it changes trade, you look at the way that it changes social classes. It's really kind of amazing. What other themes are we going to see during this early modern period? Slave trade. Now, have we had slavery before?
Yes.
Yeah. But we're going to have a new kind of slave trade now based on race. Now, some other fun ones to look at. We're going to have the establishment of a new global superpower. Not really global, regional superpower. The Ottomans are going to capture Constantinople in 1453. That's kind of another turning point. It's another major theme. The end of Christianity in that part of the world and the establishment of a new dominant culture. Yeah. You're right. And there's a lot of different reasons why we're going to see shorter and shorter periods now. Change seems to be happening more quickly because human beings are having more and more contact with each other. And if they're having more contact with each other, what's going to happen much more often? Diffusion of ideas, diffusions of culture, and what else is going to happen a lot?
War.
Conflict, disease, war, death, mayhem, chaos. And so we're going to see opportunities for themes to start and stop much quicker. Plus, what else is happening worldwide as we get further and further along in history?
More people are being born.
Oh, yeah, exactly. There's more people. And simply having more bodies on the planet is going to make history move along a little bit quicker. So we've got the Ottomans changing power in the Middle East, Western Europe beginning to expand, and also, equally importantly, what does China choose to do at about this time period?
Isolate itself.
Right, isolate itself and stop exploring. And I think we've already beaten that horse pretty well, but have we established why that was such a big deal that China stopped exploring?
They wanted to fight more Mongols.
Well, right, they wanted to fight more Mongols, but did we also establish how that kind of changed the future of the world? Okay, good. So in this era, you're going to see from the beginning, the overthrow of some old cultures, new cultures becoming more powerful, some new themes of expansion and conflict, especially with gunpowder. And by the end of this era, we will once again radically alter human existence with the Industrial Revolution and the creation of machines. Machines that are automated and that do work faster, quicker, more efficiently, and more accurately than man does. So, for example, the locomotive, the steam engine, which comes to symbolize the Industrial Revolution. All right, so do we kind of understand periodization now? How you can break history up into chunks based on themes? So it's not like we've just been arbitrarily chopping history up by these random dates. But do you see the thought process behind it? Now, with this idea of periodization, is there room for argument?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. This is heavily subjective. Because, anybody who pursues a career in history, which by the way is not me. I'm not pursuing a career in history. I'm pursuing a career in education. But the people that just study this for their life's work, I've met people that will argue this date by 5 years for their entire career. They're like, no, it shouldn't be 1450, it should be 1445. And that is their life stream, is to get people to recognize that this period should really start in 1445.
Pretty self-centered.
Well, they're not looking at it as self-centered. They're looking at it as, impacting the world by getting people to appreciate a different set of themes. Emily? That's an excellent question. And that, again, is part of the issue with periodization being so subjective. Who cares? Whether it's 1400 or 1450, or can't we just say the 15th century? Some people will say, well, it does matter, because if we cut it off at 1450, all of these things are happening right around it. But if we go back 100 years before, or if we go 100 years ahead, life suddenly looks very different. Some people will go, yeah, but it's still basically... And again, that's what makes it so subjective. And that's why I'm glad you're asking that question. And that's what I want you to see. Is that while on the one hand, periodization makes history a little bit more digestible, because you can break it up into more manageable chunks, it also makes some people look really, really sad that they spend their entire professional career arguing over these few dates. Now, here's the other really hard part. Could we safely say that we know which period we're in right now?
Maybe.
Maybe? According to your textbook, the last period that you study runs from 1914, which is the beginning of World War I, which obviously has a huge impact on humanity, to now. Is it possible that we're actually in an entirely different period?
Yeah.
Right. But is it possible that that last period that started in 1914 with the World Wars, could that period have actually ended with the end of the Cold War, birth of the internet, creation of television, creation of cellular communication, breaking of the atom? I mean, any of those things could be events that we look back on later and go, wow, that fundamentally changed the way humans lived, and from that point, life was different. So not only is it important to understand that these are the periods that we break history up into, but it's also important to recognize that it's kind of subjective, and there is always room for revision. And for many people, their mentality is, who really cares? So we're going to stop talking about dates for the moment, and we're going to look at some of these major themes that you guys already brought up. So one of the first and one of the biggest is the weaponization of gunpowder. And especially the fact that those that do weaponize it have a tremendous advantage over the people that haven't. So when we say gunpowder empire, what do you think we mean? And it's a pretty simplistic explanation, actually, so don't feel like you have to get too fancy. What do we mean by gunpowder empire? Yes? Right. Those who have gunpowder make empires and rule over the people that don't have it. Like I said, it's actually pretty simple. We're not trying to be tricky with this one. And who do we mean when we talk about gunpowder empires? Well, we mean the people that first weaponized gunpowder. So that would be Western Europe and several civilizations in Asia, specifically the Ottomans, the Mughals, and Russia. Now, if there's one thing we know about technology is that over time, it does what? It changes, and what else? Yes, you're right. Typically, it changes for the better, although better in this case might mean more deadly. But does it stay in the same place where it was invented? What does it do? It spreads. And so what we're also going to see over time is that the number of places we could consider to be gunpowder empires increases. Japan will become a gunpowder empire. The United States would become a gunpowder empire. Nick?
When were we an empire?
Well, it depends on how you want to define empire, but we certainly controlled enough of the Caribbean and Central America and exerted our influence over the Western Hemisphere in general that people would possibly assume that we are, in fact, an empire. But can you see how gunpowder itself is going to radically alter civilization? And like your article talked about, one of the biggest changes is now who fights. It used to be the upper class. It used to be the nobles that spent years and years, whether they were knights or samurai or whatever. They were an elite class. You look at the Hindu caste system. Who's second from the top? The warriors. What does gunpowder do to that? Well, what do you mean by degrade?
Like, they're not the only ones that are worse because they're going to have to rely on the artisans and other little low-class people to make their gunpowder, and then they become powerful because they know.
Okay, good. So some of this is that the lower class becomes more involved in the process. What else, Nick?
Well, it gives any soldier the opportunity to kill a knight, and their armor becomes pretty much ineffective.
Right.
Becomes a bunch of heavy iron plates.
Exactly. You know, I've never studied martial arts a day in my life, and if I went over to one of those Taekwondo studios and picked a fight with a black belt, what's probably going to happen to me?
They're going to end up with your face in the floor.
I'm going to get my butt whooped. It's not even going to be close. But with a gun, is it now more than a fair fight?
It's unfair in your favor.
Well, I mean, it's unfair if we're trying to fight the same way, but in terms of our abilities to be lethal, are the odds now significantly leveled?
More than not.
No, they're not leveled. I now have a huge advantage. I can be lethal from a distance. And I can be lethal instantaneously. It's not going to take me years and years of study of how to use a firearm in order to suddenly be lethal. That's why we see so many tragic news headlines about people that are accidentally shot. You know, a small child picks up a gun. Instantly lethal.
Big accident waiting to happen with that.
Exactly. James?
Plus, like, having gunpowder and having guns in general is pretty much degrade the warrior class because they specialize in close-range weapons. Guns can fire from any range.
Yep.
So you can be like this distance to like that fan over there with a knife, with like a sword.
Yep.
If that fan has a gun, unless I can put my field quick enough, or we can deflect gun, bullets,
Yep.
I'm screwed.
Yeah, exactly. This completely changes not only the culture of warfare, but the culture of society.
People now have it more instantaneous to go to self-defense.
Yeah.
Like if, Robert mentioned
Yeah. So again, it's not just battle that's changed. It's society as well. Now, lots of people will argue that this is a bad thing or that this is a good thing, and we don't unfortunately have time for that argument. But I need you to realize how broad the impact is. Not just in warfare, but in society as a whole. Emily? Well, it does, kind of. Because what do you notice in terms of casualties in war before gunpowder versus after gunpowder? What do you notice about casualties in wars that involve guns versus those that don't? Paul?
Like in the Roman Empire, tens of thousands of people would die in battles, and then nowadays only like a few hundred.
Well, and some of that maybe has to do with the scope of the conflict. But if we look at the biggest battles, pre-gunpowder versus post-gunpowder, you know, if you look at casualty figures for the Civil War or the World Wars, compared to casualty figures in, you know, ancient Greek and Roman battles, I mean, are we using the same numbers to count the dead, Nick?
Actually, Rome lost 50,000 people in one day at Cannae,
Mm-hmm.
which was where Hannibal defeated them.
Right.
That's around the same number of casualties we lost in 10 years in Vietnam, which is a gunpowder war.
Right. And so again, some of this is the scale of the conflict and the number of troops that you bring into battle in the first place.
Also, the battles take much longer. They become protracted campaigns.
Right. And so one of the things that we need to look at is the largest, you know, the largest numbers involved in combat in the briefest battle. So if we take a one-day battle, like you're saying, with the Romans where they lose 50,000, and we take a one-day, like let's say the Battle of the Somme during World War II,
What?
where they lose 2 million.
World War I, the Somme. That was French warfare.
Sorry, you're right, World War I. But the number is still the same, where it's 2 million because of the new technology.
in one day.
Well, within the span of a battle.
Oh, okay. How long was that battle left?
A couple days.
Wow.
Stephen? Right. And that's why you need more people, because now more people are now lethal. You know, if you go back before gunpowder, you can't have an army in the millions because you don't have that many people that can effectively fight. With guns,
You just need someone who can.
everybody is now lethal. Right. Right, but that is my point, is that the size of your effective military can now be much bigger with gunpowder. You know, if you go back to the feudal era and your army is composed of knights and archers, your army can only be as big as the number of people that know how to fight with a sword or a bow and arrow. Now, you can have an army that's as big as somebody who has the physical dexterity to pull a trigger, which radically increases the number of people at your disposal.
And keep it steady.
Well, right. But you know what? As guns get better, you can be shaky and still hit people. It's fine. You can close your eyes and still hit people. Again, practice makes you better, but...
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just like killing someone else and self-defense or something.
Right.
And I think, why not aim for the leg or foot?
Well, that's an entirely different issue. Then when you have, the heat of the moment and right.
Yeah, but I mean,
Okay. Entirely new theme now. Put guns on hold. Put them away. Put your guns away.
the ones that you're talking about.
New theme. Truly global exchange. We now are going to incorporate the entire planet into both organized trade and accidental cultural diffusion. Now, the Columbian Exchange is more going to be an example of cultural diffusion than it is of literal trade. Now, any guesses where the term Columbian Exchange comes from? Who it's named after? Columbus.
Then what? Is the country Colombia also named after him, or is there some other?
Honestly, I don't know. It's a good question. Right. But the term Columbia itself, is that in honor of Columbus, or is that some other root? Right. That's one I'd have to go back and look at. So the Columbian Exchange, again, is more about cultural diffusion than it is literal trade. It's about Europeans that come to the New World that bring with them parts of their culture, and once here are exposed to parts of American culture, which then when Europeans go back, find their way going back as well. So things like corn and potatoes, American food staples, that once they're introduced to Europeans, they're like, wow, this is kind of tasty. I think I will take a few back, and I will expose a few people to it, and those people will then demand more of those goods, and then we will eventually have a trade established. Much the same way with the diseases that decimate populations in the New World. They are brought over accidentally. Europeans didn't realize how dirty they were. And not dirty like they didn't shower, but dirty in terms of the number of toxins that their bodies had been exposed to over hundreds of years. The number of illnesses that their bodies had developed immunities for. And immunities are really just small portions of a disease that your body maintains so that it knows how to fight them. And so when Europeans come into contact with Americans, and not Americans like us, but Americans as in natives, they are spreading these toxins unknowingly. And so their body's ability to fight smallpox, influenza, measles, whooping cough, scarlet fever, all of that stuff, also enable them to spread those same diseases to the natives unknowingly. Yeah.
Did the Europeans get any diseases in return?
Pretty much just one. Syphilis, which does not seem at all fair. But there's lots of things that Europeans become exposed to as a result of contact with the New World. Tobacco, cacao, which is chocolate. I know. And the Americas get some new stuff that we typically don't realize they were without. They didn't have large domesticated animals. Cows, horses, sheep, goats, pigs did not exist in the New World.
They did, but they also had
Well, they had mammoth-sized ones long ago, but they did not have large domesticable animals, except for, anybody remember in South America? Llamas and guinea pigs and dogs. A little bit. Yes, chickens seem to be common the world over. Yes, guinea pigs were food. But not domesticated. Pet jaguars, not so much the case. Okay, so bring it on back. When we look at impacts, what happens to the Americas as a result of this exchange?
They become more advanced.
They die and they become more advanced at the same time.
So it's double-edged sword.
They
Yes.
become more advanced and dying.
Actually, I don't think sword's the right term to use because they're not the ones wielding it.
Right.
So,
So populations in the Americas will experience significant decline because of disease. Populations in the Americas will also be exposed to European technologies like firearms and European goods and products like larger livestock and different foods that will benefit those that survive the epidemics. Now, by the same token, what does Europe and the rest of the Eastern world get out of this?
a lot of this agricultural stuff that they haven't had access to.
A much more varied diet and a much healthier diet, especially when you consider things like corn and potatoes that come back and are far more nutritious, higher calorie, and provide the body with a much better fuel source, which increases population. And ironically, because of that increased population, what's going to happen?
Europeans move to America.
It's going to give them even more reasons to come over here and colonize all of this available land, or at least available as they see it. So again, that will be another theme during this 300-year period that we're going to study.
Actually, I have a question.
Sure.
You know if there's like a place to look on the left somewhere that shows like the newest countries and from new to old or old?
CIA fact book.
What?
The CIA fact book. Yeah. The CIA has a database of all that information. It's called the CIA fact book. Okay.
Just Google it and find it somewhere?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just curious how new the country we are compared to the newer one.
Okay. Yeah, they can tell you that.
Okay.
All right, speaking of exchange, like we said, some of this is more cultural diffusion and some of this is literal trade. When we talk about literal trade, we're going to see a shift in the location of where most trade is happening. Before this early modern period, where is most trade happening? Around the Indian Ocean. So that would include countries like who? China, India, Japan, East Africa, and the Muslim empires. And what kinds of goods are most in demand in that area?
Luxury?
Silks, spices, and porcelain. What we're going to find during this early modern period is the center of trade is going to shift its location and will now be focused across the Atlantic. Who does that give an edge to? Europe. Why? Because they're closer to it. And the trade goods are going to change as well. Now, these things will still be valuable. And in fact, Europeans will be in a constant quest to get their hands on these same products. But we're also going to find new products become valuable as well. What's this one? Cotton. Sugar. And silver. These will become just as valuable and sought after during this new period.
How much more common is silver than gold at that time?
Probably slightly more common, which is why silver typically has slightly less value than gold.
Yeah. I'm just wondering why you don't see gold bars there as well.
Well, they're definitely going to mine gold as well,
Yeah.
but they're just going to find fewer deposits of it. Nick?
Was silver known to the Europeans, or was it completely new?
It was known. They were just finding a number of repositories of silver, a number of veins of silver, especially in South America. And obviously we've said a number of times now that Western Europe is going to come to dominate this new era. And so we need to talk quickly about some of the reasons for that. And it's really kind of shocking that Western Europe comes to dominate this period. Because when we look backwards, Western Europe has really been kind of unimpressive. And if we take a quick look at some of the challenges that they have faced, they've never really been what you would call technologically innovative. I mean, other than firearms, which they eventually take the lead in. But even then, that's not very immediate. The Ottomans are far superior. Yeah. One of the Europeans' shortcomings is that they were constantly relying on other civilizations to come up with good ideas and then learn from them. And then once they got all these new ideas, they typically tried to find the best possible way to use that new idea as a weapon to fight their other European neighbors. There was really no higher purpose that united Europe. They were very, very content to fight amongst themselves. Different kingdoms within the European countries fighting other European countries. That seemed to be the mindset in Western Europe. We're looking for the next great advantage to kill each other. And then they find that because they really don't have any good ideas themselves, it's really, really hard to find anything marketable so that you can trade with places that do have the good ideas. So if you want to get spices from India or silk and porcelain from China, what are you going to have to give them in order to get those things? Gold and silver. And the problem that Europe has is they don't have much naturally occurring gold and silver in Europe. And so until they discover the Americas and then discover all the gold and silver in the Americas, the Europeans have huge problems with their economic system. Now, their economic system is called mercantilism. And mercantilism is kind of the precursor to capitalism, which is the economic theory that we utilize today. So mercantilism has some basic rules that you want to know. And the first rule of mercantilism is don't ever spend your gold and silver. Hoard that. Save it. Keep it. Don't spend it because it is such a rare commodity. Well, if you can't spend your gold and silver, how do you get stuff? Well, second rule of mercantilism is make sure your fill in the blank, kingdom, country, whatever, is self-sufficient. So rule number 2 is make sure that you are self-sufficient. Make sure that your kingdom or country or whatever can make everything that it will require. So it can grow all the food that it will need. It has all of the materials to make basic commodities like clothing and tools, and has whatever it needs to build buildings. Make sure that you are self-sufficient. Make sure that you are self-sufficient so that you do not have to buy those things from other people. And then rule number 3 is, if you're not spending your gold and silver, and if you're becoming self-sufficient so you don't have to buy stuff from other people, what you should do is crank up your production levels so far that you are not only self-sufficient, but you have a surplus.
And then you can sell that surplus.
Right. So rule number 3 is make a surplus that you can then export and make money off of. Right. So don't spend your gold and silver. be self-sufficient and don't import, and then overproduce and export. So if you look at it from a bank account standpoint, if you save all the money you have and you never buy anything, but you sell all kinds of stuff, what's going to happen to your bank account? It's going to increase steadily. That is how mercantilism works. It sounds like a good system, except there's a couple problems.
Do people have to follow that system?
They don't have to, but that was the commonly practiced economic theory at the time. That was just kind of the smart business sense of most European nations. Stephen? All right, if you're only exporting, you're not really importing new ideas, unless you're maybe taking your goods someplace and then maybe you can get exposed to them, but you're right. And your food doesn't taste too good unless you have access to all the really tasty stuff somehow.
Or you trade some of your surplus for other items that aren't necessary but are not bad.
Right. So that's assuming your surplus is stuff that other people want and will engage in trade with you. Emily? Well, and see, that's the fundamental problem that Europe is faced with. Nobody wants their stuff. They can overproduce as much as they want. They can make as much wool, grow as much wheat. Nobody wants their stuff. Make as many iron tools as they want. Nobody wants their stuff.
Until they get better at firearms.
Right, until they get better at firearms. But prior to that, Europe's economic theory has a fatal flaw, which is nobody wants their stuff.
So even if they're self-sufficient, they don't get anything new.
Right. Which means if they want to get these luxury goods, what do they have to do? Buy it with gold and silver. So they're kind of screwed until they discover the Americas. Right, exactly, until they got lucky. And that, again, is another really surprising part of this story. Columbus got lucky. He bumped into, by accident, the one thing that could flip the tables on, the global power relationships.
And then flip the tables again.
And so what this leads us to then is colonization. Once Europeans discover this new world, they want to possess it in order to fix this. That's why you don't see Columbus showing up in Hispaniola and walking off the boat and shaking hands with the Taino people and saying, "Wow, it's so good to meet you. We never even imagined there was more people here. Let's be friends. I've got some things that I can teach you because you're running around half naked. You've got some things you can teach me because your farming is way better than ours. Let's be friends and benefit from each other." No. He gets off the boat and he's looking at this new world and he's thinking, mine, 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 mine. Ooh, other people, mine.
I didn't know there were anchovies there.
It's like those seagulls in Finding Nemo.
No.
That too. So, why do they do it? To fix this. Delayed jokes are the best. Okay. So why do they do it? To fix this. And the other reason why they do it is specifically this. They already have a culture that thrives and promotes conflict. So what's the logical thing to do when you get over here and you see land that you want? Do the same thing you do if you were back home and saw land that you wanted. Mine. And you try to take it. And so this is what makes these new colonies so significant, is once they discover the resources that are here, the gold, the silver, the cotton, the fact that you can grow sugar all over the place, it solves this problem. They now have gold and silver by the boatload. Do they mind spending it now? Not at all. It's like those people that just won that $500 million lottery. Do you think they mind going to the mall and shopping now? Do you think they're worried about price tags on clothes? Oh, that's not on sale. That's full price. Oh, darn. I guess I'll only buy 50 of them. Well, right.
You see, I don't think if you live that kind of money, you take the half and taxes and all that, and then you just leave it sitting in your account.
Well, that's what you should do, but that's not what people do. Now, the last thing that this does that we need to address is something that we find that we ourselves are a product of, which is this European heritage. Not genetically, but culturally. We as the United States are descended from this European mentality in some ways. And so when we look at this question, if you don't expand when you have the opportunity, is there something wrong with you? The American response to that question is a resounding yes. If you don't expand when you have the opportunity, yes, there is something wrong with you. If you don't take the opportunity to get a better paying job, if you don't take the opportunity to get a bigger house, if you don't take the opportunity to get a bigger TV, there is something wrong with you. If you are happy with a 27-inch TV and you don't want the 60-inch, there is something wrong with you. If you don't want the limited edition vehicle with the leather interior and the nav system and the sound system, if you don't want that, there is something wrong with you. Do you see where that cultural mentality comes from? Now, from the native standpoint, from the standpoint of the people that the Europeans encounter, did they have this same mentality? No. Did China have this same mentality? No. Paul?
Because there was the cultural war, right? Is that why World War I and World War II happened in Europe?
Yeah. Yeah, that has a lot to do with it. Okay. So, this is where we're going to hit the pause button for chapter 16. Now, I need to finish with this thought, so please hear this. Chapters 16 and 17, which we will cover in our usual 2-day spurts, I typically spend 2 months on in my SOL class. There is a lot that you need to know for the end of year course. So again, let me please beg and plead, if you have not been reading the textbook, these 2 chapters are critical, not just for this course, but for the SOL as well.